And the psychologist looks at me and he says, I want you to ask for what you've always wanted from your dad. And I don't even know how, but in that moment, I knew exactly what to say. And I look at this guy, who's now my dad, and I say to him, I wish you were proud of me. I wish I was good enough for you. And everybody's quiet. And I could see in the corner of my eye some of the kids like sort of shifting uncomfortably and everything because they could feel it themselves. So I almost became a dad at 15. In other words, I almost had a kid, a child. And the reason I want to share this with you is because the situation and also things that happened because of that situation made me realize some really important things that were going on inside of me. And my hope is that through this video, through this story, you can have similar realizations. It also is the biggest, most fundamental reason that I do what I do when it comes to my career, these videos, so on and so forth. But that I'll explain a little bit later. So yeah, when I was 15, I was in this relationship, and it was quite a unhealthy, toxic relationship. I won't speak on their part, but on my part, I was very closed off from my emotions. So whenever something would happen in the relationship, I would shut down, I would go cold, I would give them the silent treatment, so on and so forth. At the same time, I was also really anxious or scared that they'll leave me. I was terrified of being hurt or abandoned. Yet I was doing the very things that would most likely end up in me being abandoned or left, because I didn't know how to be healthy in that relationship. Anyway, as I said, it wasn't just me in that relationship that was unhealthy, and eventually, after about 7 months or so, I realized and I built up the courage to sort of end the relationship and leave. Now, we were sexually active in that relationship. Otherwise, how would I almost have become a dad? And about a month after we ended the relationship, there was still a lot of sort of unresolved feelings, misunderstandings. We didn't know how to separate in a healthy way. And we ended up meeting up again. And all of that sort of chemistry and unhealthiness and combination of thoughts, feelings, emotions that weren't dealt with properly kind of led to this sexual tension. And we ended up having sex. We were using protection, but this was like over 10 years ago. From what I remember, basically the condom had like come off inside of her either just before or after, we had like finished. And we were both like, oh shit. Few weeks later, she ended up taking a pregnancy test and it said positive. And the way we decided to deal with it at 15 years old was to not tell our parents. I don't know on her side why that was. For me, it was because I didn't really have much of a relationship with my parents. I lived with my dad, but with both my parents, I didn't really express myself. I didn't tell them what I was going through. As I said, I was very much emotionally closed off in all the different ways you can be. So for me, it's like, well, if they found that out, I'd be screwed, and I'd get in so much trouble, and they wouldn't support me. They would just be like mad at me and blah 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 blah. So to cut this part a little bit shorter, because this could be a whole story in and of itself, we basically had to decide between ourselves what we were going to do about that situation. And to avoid any type of, moral choice kind of drama in this video, we did what we thought was best at 15 years old. In other words, we didn't have the child. And, as two 15-year-olds trying to deal with a really intense situation, we obviously didn't do it the right way. And eventually her parents found out. Her parents told my parents, and it just became this really even more dramatic than it already was or could be. It became even more because now we had not told them, and here we were, these two kids trying to deal with a type of situation adults can barely even deal with. So this is where it transitions into a really important part of this whole story and my life, which was my parents had now found out. My mom was kind of unsure of what to do, but she was supportive. My dad kind of reacted in exactly the way I thought he would, which was anger, upset, what the fuck were you thinking? All these type of things. And I did what I thought was best again at the time and what I knew how to do, which was shut down, not express what I was thinking or feeling inside, going through something that was so intense and just keeping it all to myself, bottling it up. And I remember one moment I went to the gym with my dad because I think there was a lot of tension between him and I, and just in general during this situation as we were navigating the sort of during and after effects of it all. And we were on a treadmill in this gym. I was on a treadmill, he was on the treadmill next to me. And I remember him turning his head towards me every minute or two. And I just zoned in, kept focused, so on and so forth, bottling everything up inside. And we got home after that sort of workout session. And I remember him saying to me, he's like, I don't get it. How are you so calm and put together going through something like this? It makes no sense to me. What the hell is going on? And I remember in that moment thinking two things. One was, he's got a point. I mean, I'm 15 years old and I'm going through something crazy and I'm acting as if nothing's wrong. And as I had that thought, I could feel the sort of emotions and thoughts bubble up a bit, but again, push them down, right? And the second thing I thought of was what do you mean? I learned this from you. I was I don't understand how you don't understand, because you also never say what you're thinking or feeling. I don't know ever what's going on in your mind or what you're feeling. So I was kind of confused at that. I was like, what do you mean? I'm doing what you've always done. Isn't that how you're supposed to do it? Right? And that, when I look back on it, was or should have been the first maybe unconscious realization of what was really going on in me and in my life. So anyway, because of that, and I think especially because of that situation where I was just cold to everything that was going on, my parents decided to forcefully send me on this, what I can best describe as a psychology boot camp. They didn't tell me what it was and weren't allowed to actually tell me what it was in detail at all. And I'm gonna keep the name out of it because there's still parts of it where I'm not sure how ethically sound it was. Right? Maybe a little bit of foreshadowing. But basically all I knew was it was run by a psychologist and it was a weekend away, and they were going to meet me and 12 other kids between about 13 and 16, I think it was. And we were going to be all on a weekend together, and that's all I knew. And I was like, that's sounds freaking scary. I don't want to do it. And they were like, you don't have a choice. You just went through the situation. You have to go in this thing. So yeah. So it comes to the day of us leaving to go to this camp. And we're all in this parking lot, and like, there's kids with their parents, and basically they just get to say goodbye and then get on the bus, and that's it. Again, nobody's allowed to know anything or whatever. And we get on this bus, and I go to the back of the bus, and there are these 12 other kids, as I said, between like 13 and 16. And something that I would do at the time to deal with those type of situations, social situations, was, again, I would shove everything down. I would keep to myself. Inside, I was freaking out. I was like, what's going to go on this weekend? Who are these random kids? Etc., etc. And like, I see them all like talking and hanging out in the front of the bus, front and middle of the bus, and I'm just at the back, again, coping with all of that in the way that I know best, which is keep to myself, shut down, don't talk to anybody, so on and so forth. Anyway, it's about like a 3 to 4 hour bus ride, and we arrive at the camp, and it starts to get around nighttime now. And as we get off the bus, literally as we get off the bus, we line up, and they put fucking blindfolds on us, right? We don't know what's happening. We've just got to this random place. We haven't even met these people properly, or at least I haven't. They've made friends in the bus, at least some of them. And now we get these blindfolds put on us. And what they start to do is they ask us to put our hands on the front of the person in front of us, or on the shoulders of the person in front of us. And they start guiding us through what I can best describe as like a weird jungle maze type thing, where we are going like over these rocks and down these hills, and we are dodging sharp objects and blah, 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 all while blindfolded and while holding the person in front of us. And my assumption at the time was the person in front of us was being led by one of the staff members who could see. At least that's what I hope. Anyway, looking back on it now, I realized that, as well as a few other activities we did over the weekend, were there to help us build trust in each other. And the reason we needed to do that was because right after that blindfold journey, we got taken into a room, and we all sat down in a circle. The room was dark. I think there was like a light or candle or something so that the room was like dimly lit. And we were all sitting in a circle, and I think we had some of our packed food, and we had like a pillow and our blankets and stuff like that. And the psychologist comes into the circle, and he basically asks us to share what's most alive in us right now, aka what are we experiencing and feeling that's the most intense for us right now in our life. And there's a lot of hesitation, a lot of no one wants to speak. It's like 13 boys, like 13 boys, and at least from the country I'm from, especially in the sort of school phase, we are taught to not talk about our feelings. It's lame, it's weird, it's weak. And I can't remember if I was the first one or not, but I do remember that I got to this point where I was just like, you know what, screw it. I'm here. Some part of me could just know that I needed to express some things. So I shared what I'd just been through. I shared about, almost having a kid, and I shared about my experience with my dad. And I cried a lot in front of these 12 other boys. And what I noticed, which is really awesome, and I hope this can be a lesson in and of itself, is as I shared, as I allowed myself to be vulnerable, I saw how it allowed each of the other kids to further step into their vulnerability, to share what they needed to share, to let go of some of the burden that they needed to let go of. And I'm getting emotional right now just because I'm realizing as I say this is that was a huge reason I do what I do now, or at least part of it. And again, I'll share what I do later. But so that was the first night, right? First day and night, we're like, get sent on this trust exercise, and then we sit down and we basically have this group therapy session. And all the while, this psychologist is pushing us to go deeper, number one, and number two, he's taking notes. And this is important later. And over the next like 2 days, that's pretty much what we do. We do trust activities and like games and stuff in the day, and then at the night, we go into these big like sharing sessions. And all the while, during our interactions with each other in the day, during the trust activities, and during these therapy sessions, the psychologist is taking notes on us. And I realize, sometime looking back after it, it was all a build-up, a method, a formula, it all had a reason, and the reason was to get to this last day of the weekend. And on this last day of the weekend, we all come into this room, right? All 13 of us. It's a different room now. It's a much bigger room. And in this room, it's almost like I don't know if you guys know what a scouts club is, or cubs, or it's, you know, like maybe like in America, for example, it's like wilderness explorers or whatever, you know, like camp kids, that type of room, that big room that would be the main meeting room or whatever. So there's pictures all over the walls, and there's, you know, a couple chairs in the corners, and there's tables, but everything's been moved apart. So it's just this big open area. And we're all filing into this room, and they ask us to stand in a circle. And again, following the theme of this whole fucking weekend, like, they don't tell us what's going to happen. They don't want us to they don't want to tell us what's going on, but they basically said each of you are going to have a experience, and we're going to go one by one. So already, you know, I'm like, what is going on? My heart's like beating a little bit faster. I'm like looking around, everybody's looking at each other. They're like, what's going to happen? And there were 3 experiences that the kids had that really stood out to me. And I'll share those just to give you a really good idea of what went on. The first kid was this, I think he was like a year younger than me, or maybe even 2 years. And he actually went to my school, which was interesting. These were kids from like all over the country, I think, or at least the city that I was in. And this kid was like, so he would have been 13 or 14, but he was like as big as I am now, right? I'm like 27 right now. This kid was a big kid, but he was the nicest, like sweetest kid ever. But that ended up actually being what he was there for, because he would get bullied relentlessly at school. Again, all boys school, you know. And he would get bullied, but he would do nothing about it because he was so sweet and kind. So he would like allow this bullying to happen. But obviously, internally, it was like tearing him down. So anyway, as I said, you know, the psychologist had taken notes the whole weekend. So he knew exactly what this kid was going through and dealing with, both externally, but more importantly, inside of him. And he also then knew what sort of challenge he had to face, or event he had to have. And basically, the psychologist, and something else important I forgot to mention was there were also other staff members on this weekend. So other like men, right? So people between like maybe 30, and there was one that was even 60 or 70 years old. There weren't too many of them, maybe like 4 or 5, but they were there nonetheless to sort of like facilitate and hold space and everything. So one of the men brought in this rolled up mattress, like bed, that had been like taped so that it was in this roll shape. And they put it on the floor in front of this kid. And then the psychologist walks out with a cricket bat, similar to like a baseball bat, for example. And they hand this bat to this kid, and everybody's like, what is going on? What's going to happen, right? And basically, the psychologist said, I want you to use the bat to hit this mattress as hard as you can. So the kid very like awkwardly walks over and hits the mattress. Not much of a hit, to be honest, right? And the psychologist is like, no, it's like, I want you to really hit that bat. I want you to let that anger out that you've been keeping inside of you. And then this kid starts hitting this mattress, right? And he's getting it a little bit harder, a little bit harder. And then he asks the kid to pause. And the psychologist walks over to us, this group of like 12 kids who are now like bunched up watching this thing happen, right? So not only is this kid hitting his bat, he's also being watched by 12 other boys. And the psychologist comes over to us and like without this kid hearing, and he said, I want you to call him the names that he gets called at school. And we knew what those names were because, you know, we'd heard his story over the weekend. Man. And the psychologist asked this kid to hit the mattress again. And 12 of us kids start calling this kid names that he was called at school. That he was like relentlessly bullied in that way. And slowly but surely you just saw how at first this kid just got really angry and starts like beating this mattress, letting all this stuff out. And then you just saw how it turned into like tears. And now he's like beating this mattress with almost no energy and just like tears streaming down his face. And I get emotional because, number one, I know what it's like to be bullied, and I also know what it's like to bully someone. And to see how much it impacted him in that sort of deeper level, just like completely shifted the way I saw that type of normal fucking interaction at school. And it was really intense. But the beautiful thing was this kid came face to face with that internal stuff and he like let it out, he expressed it. And in doing so, he realized that he had power, he had aggression, he had the ability to like fight back. Yeah, and he was just he was just a really nice kid. Okay, I didn't think I'd go like too much into detail with these mini stories, but I'll continue it anyway. I'll see if I can shorten it a bit. So the next kid, he was also much younger. He was also like 13 or 14. And basically his father had passed away, I think before he can even remember properly. Or he could remember, but he was like, you know, middle-aged as a kid. What would you call that? Toddler. So maybe like 8, 9, 10, something like that. And the psychologist asked him to choose one of the men that best represented or looked like his father, who had passed. And there was this older man who was like maybe 60 or 70 years old, because that's about how old his dad would have been if he had been alive. And the psychologist asked this kid to leave the room. So the kid leaves the room and they start preparing this old man. once the old man is prepared, they ask the kid to come back, and this kid walks into the room. And at first you can see he's almost like a little bit excited to see what his event is. And then on the floor, he sees this body covered in like a black cloth. And all of a sudden you see him start to become like a little bit like nervous, or I don't even know if nervous is the right word. Maybe he like realized what was happening, but like you could see his whole face change, and he started looking very more like sad, defeated. I don't know. I didn't ask him what he was like feeling in that moment. But basically what they had done is they had taken this old man and they had laid him on the ground and they put like a cover over him. And the psychologist says, like, this is your dad. I want you to go up to him. I want you to take that cloth off of his face, and I want you to tell him what you never got to tell him. Now, to cut this one a little bit short, the kid ended up doing that, and, you know, more tears, more sadness, and he got to express to his dad what he really wanted to express, what he never got to before he passed. And, so I'm just checking that it's still capturing my voice. Then the last one I want to share with you, also this really big kid, but he was actually a year or two older than us. I think he was one of the oldest in the group. But this guy was, he was massive. Like, he was like A-team rugby. If you don't know what rugby is, it's similar to American football, but like more intense in my opinion, more like rough and tough. So this kid was like, you know, stocky and like big, and his calves were like as big as my head, and that's important in a bit. But very similar situation where he would be bullied at school, but he was also too nice, as in he let it happen. And this time was a little bit different. And I still, to this day, I don't actually know if the difference was just to keep it fresh, or if there was like a deeper reason to each of the specific details in the actions or events. But basically, the psychologist had all 12 of us, the rest of the kids, pin this kid up against a wall, right? So all 12 of us had to basically push him and then push each other to hold this kid against the wall. And again, we would call him names that he was like called at school. And this kid's job, I say kid, he was older than me, but this boy's job was to push all 12 of us back, right? Let himself use whatever like strength, power, anger he had inside of him. So again, it got to the point where this kid was first angry and he was shouting, right? And the psychologist would say, so I don't know if you could hear that or not. I just want to make sure. And the psychologist would say, shout louder, like let your anger out, push them back. And we would be literally in his fucking ear whispering or saying these like names that he would be called at school. The wildest thing, and maybe this will give you a good idea of like how big this kid was, is he ended up pushing all 12 of us back. And now that I think about it, it might have been more his like calves, because his calves were just massive. That's the one thing I remember. This kid just had huge calves. And he ended up pushing 12 of us back. Like, how crazy is that? Anyway, it got to my turn. And if I'm not mistaken, I was like last, if not one of the last. Like one of the last like 2 or 3. I could have been the last. I don't even remember those like small details anymore. But I'm standing there, and the psychologist looks at me, and he's like, okay, Aaron, it's your turn. And everybody looks at me. And by now, by the way, I had actually made friends with a lot of these kids over the weekend, over like the trust activities and me being able to open up a bit more and everything. And to this day, some of the kids who are now not kids, they look back and they say, I really admired you. I really looked up to you. Like they were the younger ones. And I could feel that even at the time, right? There were some of the younger kids that I was really open to and like, in a way, almost like took them under my wing, right? If you want to call it that, but like not in any like real way, just like I could feel that. And so the psychologist says, Aaron, it's your turn. And I'm freaking out. I'm like, oh my God, what am I gonna have to do? Do I have to like fight someone? Do I have to like hit something? And like my hands are shaking and my heart's beating fast. And I'm like, I could remember what I was thinking internally was like, one aspect was what's gonna happen. Another aspect was like, am I gonna embarrass myself, right? Am I gonna look uncool or whatever? And the psychologist and one of the staff members pulls two chairs into the middle of the circle. And I was like, what's going on? I thought I was gonna like fight something. Do I have to like arm wrestle something? Like, what the hell's going on? You know what I mean? And the psychologist looks at me and he says, I want you to choose someone who most looks like your father. Ugh, even as I say that now, I'm like, ooh. But as I hear that, my stomach just like drops. Because here I was like, I'm here because, I just went through this intense experience with like, almost having a kid and everything. And then here this psychologist at the sort of peak pinnacle thing of the event is like, I want you to choose someone who best looks like your father. You're basically going to have an experience with your father right now. And it felt like in one way like a complete blindside. Almost as if someone was just like pulling back the curtain and being like, here's the real issue. So I felt really exposed and I felt really like seen in like an uncomfortable way. Uncomfortable because it's like pushing past my comfort zone. And so there was this one staff member that was like around the same age, similar hair color and everything like that. And sometimes he would also have this like stern look on his face. And I was like, yeah, that's my dad. So we sit down in the circle and like there's these 12 kids and like staff members surrounding the circle, all looking at us. And me and this guy who's representing my dad sat face to face to each other on these two chairs. And the psychologist looks at me and he says, I want you to ask for what you've always wanted from your dad. And I don't even know how, but in that moment, I knew exactly what to say. And I look at this guy, who's now my dad, and I say to him, I wish you were proud of me. I wish I was good enough for you. And everybody's quiet. And I could see in the corner of my eye some of the kids like sort of shifting uncomfortably and everything because they could feel it themselves. And I look at the psychologist, I'm like, okay, what now, all right? The psychologist walks over to this man and he whispers in his ear. And all of a sudden, this guy's face just changes. And he looks angry and he looks stern. And he looks at me and he's like, I'm not proud of you. You will never be good enough for me. And I was just like, what the fuck? I was so like, I was frozen. I didn't know what to do or say. I'm like, okay. I was like, what am I, like, how do I respond to this? And I could feel like this just like stab in my stomach and chest. And there's some silence, and the psychologist looks at me and he says, I want you to fight for it. I want you to show him that you're good enough. I want you to show yourself that you're good enough. Stand up for yourself. Make him see you. So like very sort of weakly, I'm like, I'm good enough. And even now I'm able to say it with more conviction, but back then it was like this very meek, very weak, like I'm good enough. The psychologist is like, louder, stand up for yourself. And I'm like, I'm good enough. And I can feel myself holding back, right? Like there's this tension, there's this friction, there's almost like this fucking wall. And as I'm doing this, like I'm like tearing up and everything, the psychologist is like, stand up for yourself. Like show him that you're good enough. Let him see you. And again, I'm like, I'm good enough, right? I'm getting loud and I'm like feeling it more. And he's like, no. He doesn't need to be proud of you, right? It's like, this is not for him, this is for you. And he's like, show yourself you're good enough. And then I'm just like, I'm good enough. And then like, I'm fucking bawling my eyes out and like, it just hits, right? And like this is just like this release and all these like emotions, and I'm crying. And at that point, to be honest, don't fully remember, but when I sort of came to, not that I passed out or anything, but I was just like in such this fucking like space of letting go and like fucking releasing whatever was inside of me, I realized that I had like ended up in this man's arms, cradled like a fucking kid, bawling my eyes out. And this guy was crying, this fucking like 40-something-year-old man. He was crying, seeing me crying like that. And like some of the kids in the circle were crying too, because they could relate, they could resonate. And I realized, both in that moment, but also looking back on it, a couple really important things. One of which was, there was so much internal shit that was going on inside of me, and I needed to let that out. I needed to like acknowledge it and express it. Secondly, I realized how, or where it really came from, this like deep belief of like, I'm not good enough, right? I'm not worthy, no one's proud of me, all that kind of shit. It came from like really early on in my childhood. And specifically in this situation, all the things my dad did and didn't do. In the ways that I needed, let's say. And because of that, I took on this belief of I'm not good enough. This really deep belief. And after this weekend, I had a bit of time to reflect. And one thing I really became aware of was like, and to tie this back into the whole point of this, or the beginning of this, was, you know, I reflected on like, holy shit, I was almost just a dad. And I promised myself in that moment of realizing that when I do have a kid, and if I had that kid, I would make absolutely fucking certain that kid would never think or believe that he is not good enough. And I promised myself from that day on that I was going to understand why I felt that way, because I knew it wasn't just my dad. And this is a really important thing. Like, it doesn't all come from only the parents, but a large portion of it does. But I was going to make sure that I figured out why I didn't feel good enough. And I was going to make sure I shifted that belief, so that I could also then pass that on to my kid, so I could know how to make him feel good enough. And that's probably the core reason I do what I do today. Because from 15, when I realized not only, how unhealthy and toxic my relationship was, but the reason that it was that way was because of, part of the reason it was that way was because, I was so closed off. I didn't want anybody to see me. I didn't feel good enough to share and express what was going on inside of me. And now I knew where this, part of where this belief came from. I became, from 15, very aware of all of this. And I made it my mission in life to basically understand myself to as a deep of a level as I could, and to work on shifting and overcoming those beliefs. Those beliefs which cause insecurities, those beliefs which cause unhealthiness, those beliefs which cause a deep lack of belief in self. And I did that. I've been doing that for about, 12 years now. 15 to 27. And I've made a lot of progress in that, which is really awesome. I wouldn't be making this video. I wouldn't have a social media following of 400,000 on Instagram, 300,000 on TikTok, 400,000 on Facebook if I hadn't done what I've done. And to tie this into what I'm doing now, I help people, specifically in relationships, but in life in general, overcome, first of all, realize, identify, and understand where these insecurities, fears, limiting beliefs come from. I help them shift them. I help them let go of them. I help them release them. And then I help build them up with really healthy, important skills, so that, number one, they can show up more healthily in their relationships and with themselves and in life in general. But more importantly, to really cultivate a deep understanding of themselves and a deep belief in themselves, like a I am good enough. I know who I really am, and I can see that is more than good enough, so that they can feel healthy and confident in general, but also relationships in life. That's what I do. And I do that with I've coached one-on-one over 100 people. I've got a community. I also have the social medias, obviously, and YouTube is my next big step in that direction. So, and I've been through so many different realizations, tools, techniques, lived experiences myself. And that's how I can do what I do. And I love it. I love it. I fucking love it. This is my passion. This is what I was made to do. It's to help people overcome the same challenges that I had, just in a much quicker time. It took me 8 years to get to what they call secure attachment. I get to help people get there within a few months, or way closer to there in a few months, which is awesome. I've coached therapists, coached people of all different backgrounds and different countries and different lives, different ages. And I'm just so grateful. So really what I hope, the sort of most core thing that I hope you take away from this is that there is shit going on inside of you that you need to become aware of, because it is holding you back. It is limiting you. It is keeping you down in so many different ways. And it's keeping you in these like unconscious, unhealthy cycles and patterns in your relationships, in your life. And it's not you. It's not you. You're not broken, you're not flawed, you're not fundamentally different. You just haven't become aware of it yet. You haven't learned the skills you need to learn. Like, you have so much more potential than you think. And I know, because I was like I was at the depths. I was at the depths of like my life, of my relationships, unhealthy in every fucking way possible. And I really want you to realize and understand that it's not because of you. There are things going on inside of you that you just don't know about yet, that you don't understand fully, that you don't know how to shift subconsciously, beliefs-wise, and also just like tangible things you can do differently to have more success. And I don't mean success like business or anything like that. That's a part of it. But I mean like success in life. And success to me is being authentic to who you are, is showing up in your most real, true, authentic way. Healthiness and confidence is just a byproduct of that. But to do that, you have to know who you really are. You have to know that true self. And there are ways to do that. And then you have to shed these limiting beliefs, these fears that come from these experiences you have in life. With parents, with friends, family, close ones, so on and so forth. And that's like all those different ideas, tools, understandings, exercises, blah, 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 blah. That's what I obsessed over. And it works. It fucking works. It's hard, but it works. And I say that just to, again, I'm really trying to motivate you to do the inner work. Because without the inner work, the outer stuff doesn't fucking matter. And this is where you hear about like millionaires, billionaires who are depressed, who are sad, who hate themselves in life. It's because they haven't done the inner work. They got really good at like business and everything, but they haven't done that inner work. And the irony is, like, when you do the inner work, the outer stuff comes naturally. So I know, for example, by sharing this story, by being true to myself, that like people are going to resonate in some way or another. And they're going to have some shifts. And they're going to recognize, here's somebody who has been through it, right? Been in the fucking war and has come out the other end. Like, that's who I want to be around, work with, learn from. I know, because that's what's happened with my social medias, my short form social medias. I share what I know. I share what I've experienced. I share what I know is true and real because I've lived it. And through there, I get clients. That's a small example around how, like, when you do the inner work and you stay true to yourself, the outer stuff is natural. And part of me is still working on really sort of letting go into that, but this is part of it. So I don't know how to fucking end this, to be honest. I just hope you gained something. I hope you resonated. I hope you fucking cried. I hope you saw yourself and your own experiences in this. But most importantly, I hope you realize that there's some shit inside of you you need to work on. You need to become aware of, and you need to work on it. I hope that for you, because it will completely change your life for the better. And yeah, without trying to sound salesy, like, if you need help with that, I've got a lot of experience with it. I know how to help you identify these things and work through them on like a really deep level. So if you want that, I've got some free stuff for you to check out first, and then if you want to do deeper work, let me know.